What is going on, college basketball fans? Welcome back to another video, and today we have my official preseason bracketology predictions where we take Joe Lunardi's preseason bracketology and we put it into our own PDF and fill it out from the first round all the way to the national championship. We are going to do many of these throughout the regular season and a ton of them whenever the official bracket is revealed, and just a ton of content on college basketball in general coming your way this year, guys. So make sure you guys subscribe if you guys are college basketball fans. This is the place to be. And yeah, guys, I'm ready to get started. Hit that like button if you guys enjoy. And this Final Four that I will have at the end of this video is going to be my official preseason Final Four picks. So I want you guys to let me know down below in the comment section, who is your guys' preseason Final Four? Let me know down below, guys, and let's get right into it. So first matchup, we have our top overall seed, the Kansas Jayhawks, and for good reason. They are absolutely loaded, bringing back a ton of talented players, bringing in the most talented player in the portal in AJ Storr. Got high-level recruits coming in to come off their bench this year as well, and they're going to be facing Quinnipiac this year. And I know most of the Power 5 teams and a lot about them. As far as Quinnipiac and some of these mid-major teams, you know, I still got to learn, and we're going to find out as the season goes on. Will Quinnipiac actually make March Madness this year and win their league? I'm not sure, but I think Kansas wins this game. They're so talented. I don't see Bill Self and this Kansas team being the third team to ever lose to a 16 seed in the first round of the tournament, so give me Kansas to move on here. Clemson and Oregon. That is actually a very, very interesting matchup. Clemson had that good run last year, I believe, to the Sweet 16. Looked really good. They lose P.J. Hall to the NBA, but they are bringing back a few other players that I think are going to be really good. And I think Clemson is going to get back to March Madness this year. However, Oregon, usually when they get to the tournament, they play really good. They have an awesome head coach in Dana Altman. I think that he always gets to march with Oregon and pulls off a few wins that nobody expected him to. And this could definitely be one of those years, and I am going to predict for that to happen. I am going to have Oregon defeat Clemson here in the first round, 9 over an 8 seed. The Ducks move on. Next up, we got Marquette versus McNeese State, and I do like this Marquette team a lot. I have trouble getting a feel of how far they can go in March this year. They're definitely going to make March Madness, but do I think that they could go on a sleeper Final Four run without Tyler Kolek? I'm not so sure. I know Cam Jones is going to be one of the better scorers in the country this year, but I'm not sure if him, Stevie Mitchell, and these other guys are going to be able to have enough to be able to go on a deep run. I think that the deepest they're going to go this year is maybe a Sweet 16, but I think they get a tough matchup here, a tough draw with McNeese State. I think McNeese State is going to be one of the best mid-majors in college basketball this year. They could even possibly get higher than a 12 seed, but it is going to be very tough because they don't play a very hard schedule and they don't play in a very hard league. So I expect them to win that league. I expect them to get the March. And I think with this matchup in Marquette, I am going to take McNeese to get the W. I like them in this matchup. I like them in a lot of matchups, 12 over 5, and I think they're going to be one of the better mid-majors this year, so I'm going to take McNeese to move on to the next round. First big upset of the video, we got McNeese. Purdue versus High Point. Now, this is interesting. Now, Purdue coming off of a runner-up year where they made the national championship game last year and lost to UConn. And they lose Zach Edey, of course, to the NBA. So no more Zach Edey, but they do return their veteran guards now in Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer. I think Trey Kaufman-Moran is going to be one of the breakout players of the year in the Big Ten Conference and really take a lot of those touches that Zach Edey did have. But do they go back to those Matt Painter ways of losing early in the tournament? It wasn't just to Fairleigh Dickinson, 16 over 1. It was also in a situation like this. 13 over 4, they lost to North Texas. I believe there was one or two more as well recently. Like Purdue tends to lose early in the tournament. However, High Point, I think they're going to be pretty good. I think Purdue is going to get past them. I think these guards are pretty experienced now, and I am going to take Purdue to move on to the next round. Next up, we got UCLA versus VCU, and I kind of want to go with this upset here, VCU over UCLA. Whoever comes out of the A10 conference is always dangerous in March Madness, and VCU may have the team to do it this year, and I'm not too high on UCLA, although I do think Dylan Andrews is going to have a pretty good year this year for UCLA. They brought in some transfers to help him, and Kobe Johnson from USC and a few others. I think UCLA is going to be pretty decent, but I think the A10 is always dangerous in March. I'm going to go with VCU here to move on 11 over a 6. Second upset here. Arizona versus Arkansas State. Now, Arkansas State, interesting. I got to do a little bit more research on the Sun Belt. I am a supporter of the Marshall Thundering Herd, and I know about Sun Belt basketball. But this year, I need to get caught up, and I'm gonna find out quick after the season begins here next week. But Arkansas State, will they win the Sun Belt and get this bid? I'm not sure. They definitely could. But the Sun Belt usually doesn't do too well in recent memory when they get to March Madness. So I am going to actually go with Arizona. I think Caleb Love, Jaden Bradley, really good backcourt. Caleb Love in his final year in college. I think they're going to beat Arkansas State if this is the matchup. Give me Arizona. Next up, we got Xavier versus St. Mary's. Awesome matchup here. St. Mary's is one of those teams, We're waiting on them to have that big run in March Madness. I predicted them a couple runs to the Sweet 16. They're never able to do it, I feel, and Xavier has a really good team. If you guys watched my Big East preview video, I had them as my second best team in the Big East in the preseason, just behind UConn, the back-to-back champs. So I'm very high on Xavier. I think they have an awesome backcourt between Davion McKnight and transfer from Toledo, Dante Maddox. I think that is going to be an extremely underrated backcourt, and they have all the pieces around them, and Zach Fremantle returning to have a really good year. And I think Xavier defeats St. Mary's here. I know St. Mary's has a good game plan. They are very well coached. But I am going to take the Musketeers to move on here. And then we got Auburn and Lipscomb. I like Auburn a lot. I'm going to take them. I like JP Peggs. I like the freshman guard that they got coming in, Janai Broom down low. Very good team. Give me Auburn to move on. And let's go ahead and fill out region by region, because it just makes it easier than trying to come back and talking about these teams when we can just keep talking about them. Get this region filled out. So Kansas, Oregon, second round to make the Sweet 16. I don't think Oregon has enough. I think it is a possible upset here, 9 over 1 in the second round, but I think Kansas keeps on moving. Between DeJuan Harris, between Hunter Dickinson, AJ Storr, Zeke Mayo, Rylan Griffin, KJ Adams Jr., this team is stacked top to bottom. I would be very surprised if Kansas does not make a deep run in this year's March Madness tournament, and I am going to have Rock Chalk moving on to Sweet 16. McNeese State versus Purdue, and this is actually where I am going to have Purdue do Purdue things, and they are going to lose to a double-digit seed in March Madness. After making it to the national championship game last season, they are going back to their ways. Matt Painter loses to a double-digit seed in McNeese State, and McNeese, as a 12 seed, is moving on to the Sweet 16. Let's go, Cowboys. Moving on. I think that they have one of the best mid-major rosters in the country this year. I think they're going to be back with a vengeance after not doing too hot in the first round of March Madness last year when a lot of people were picking them to defeat Gonzaga. I'm taking McNeese here. This is their year. Next up, we got VCU versus Arizona, and I'm going to have Arizona move on. I think they get a good draw here, although I do think whoever comes out of the A10 is very dangerous. I think they're more dangerous in the first round than they are deeper in the tournament, and I am going to take Arizona here to move on. I think that backcourt carries them. I have some question marks about Arizona's front court, but they're very well coached by Tommy Lloyd. They got over the hump last year and made a pretty decent run. I think they get back to the Sweet 16 here, especially with this draw. Next up, we got Xavier and Auburn, and here's where I'm going to have another slight upset in the second round. It's not a McNeese over Purdue, but I am taking Xavier over Auburn in a 7 seed to defeat a 2 seed in the second round, and Xavier is moving on to the Sweet 16. I think Xavier is a better team than a 7 seed, so I think that this, based on numbers, looks like a bigger upset than what it is. I think Xavier is a stacked, well-rounded team. I also feel that way about Auburn. This is a very possible upset in my mind, and I think Xavier has all the tools to make a pretty good run this year. Give me the Musketeers to move on here to the Sweet 16. So we have our final 4 from this region: Kansas, McNeese State, Arizona, and Xavier. And we got Kansas and McNeese here in this first matchup. And unfortunately, this is where McNeese State's Cinderella run comes to an end here in the Sweet 16. I can't pick them over this loaded Kansas team. They have maybe the best roster in college basketball this season, and yeah, I'm taking Kansas to move on once again. Next up, we got Arizona versus Xavier, and I'm going to have the Musketeers keep on marching in the tournament, and I'm going to take Xavier all the way to the Elite 8. I have them over Arizona. I think their front court can do some damage against Arizona, and I think that their backcourt matches up fairly well. And to be honest, I'm not the highest guy on Jaden Bradley. I think that he's going to have to take a big step up this year, and I think that Dante Maddox and Davion McKnight can play really good defense on Caleb Love, and I actually like Xavier to beat Arizona, a much better matchup than Xavier versus Auburn. I give them a better chance against Arizona, and I would actually pick Xavier to defeat Arizona 100% if they were to match up in March Madness. Whereas Xavier versus Auburn, it's a little bit closer, and Auburn would definitely be the favorite there. But I think Auburn and Xavier are both more talented than Arizona this year. I like Xavier over Arizona here. 7 seed in the Elite 8. Then we have our Elite 8 matchup, Kansas versus Xavier, and I think Xavier gives them a very good fight, although I think Kansas just has all the tools, especially with Hunter Dickinson. I can see him matchup-wise having a big game in this one, and I'm going to have Kansas as the first ticket here to the Final Four. I know it's a little boring having a 1 seed in the Final Four in this first region, but Kansas is a force. We have some upsets along the way in this region. Now I'm actually going to move on to the bottom right region, because this region, with how it's shaped out so far right now in Joe Lunardi's Bracketology, I think could be pure chaos, and we're about to predict it. So we got Houston versus the toothpaste, and I think Houston is going to go and destroy Colgate. I don't give Colgate much of a chance in this one. I know Houston is losing their stud point guard in Jamal Shed. I think that is going to come out to be a bigger loss than what a lot of people are making it out to be. I'm not so sure Houston is going to be a 1 seed this year, but right now they're projected to be a 1 seed. I'm not so sure on that. We will see. There's a lot of really good teams in the Big 12, but I am going to have them beat Colgate here in this one. They still got LJ Cryer, which I think he's going to have to take a massive step up. They still got an amazing front court, especially Jawan Roberts, who's one of the better defensive players in the country, and Kelvin Sampson, Hall of Fame head coach. He's always going to have this defense ready. Mississippi State versus BYU. I think this is an excellent 8-9 matchup. Both these teams are super underrated in the preseason, in my opinion. And I like Mississippi State a lot. And I like Baylor a lot too, but I think they suffer from the fact that Mississippi State is one of my favorite sleeper teams of this year heading in. And Josh Hubbard, I think, is going to be a breakout star this year with how he was performing in March Madness last year as a freshman. And I know they lost in the first round to Michigan State, but it was a close game, and Josh Hubbard was playing fantastic. They went and got a transfer from Penn State and Kanye Clary. They got some other pieces as well, and they're head coached by Chris Jans, which I think is a super underrated head coach. I'm taking Mississippi State to move on to the second round over BYU here in this one. I like BYU a lot. They got a 5-star freshman coming in, even though they lost Jackson Robinson and Mark Pope to Kentucky. new head coach, 5-star recruit. I think BYU is going to be super good, and I would love to pick them to get a first-round win if they weren't going against Mississippi State, which I actually really like this year. Next up, we got Texas versus Grand Canyon. And Grand Canyon is, I think, going to be a top 2 or 3 mid-major team this year in college basketball. They are going to be a force to be reckoned with. With Ray Harrison and Tyon Grant Foster, I mean, they have 2 stars on this team returning, and I think that they are in for a big run, and I think Texas is in trouble if this is the matchup. I'm taking Grand Canyon in this one. I think this is the year they are going to make a big run, and I don't hate the matchup here, 12/5 against Texas. You know, Texas heading to the SEC. They got some good transfers coming in. I'm just not sure if they're going to be that great this year. And I think Grand Canyon, with those veterans and Tyon Grant Foster and Ray Harrison, they were actually playing some pretty good defense for the most part in March Madness last year. And they were in a fantastic matchup with Alabama, who ended up winning making it to the Final Four. I think Grand Canyon is going to be a force. Give me them. Give me the Antelopes to move on to the second round. Next up, we got Creighton versus UC Irvine. UC Irvine is always a threat to make a March Madness tournament out of their league, and I think Creighton wins, though. I think with Ryan Cockburner in his senior season, they're going to be a force. Stephen Ashworth and Pop Isaacs are going to be shooting lights out this year in that backcourt. And although they're losing Baylor Shireman, Trey Alexander, it's going to be tough, but I think Creighton at least gets by UC Irvine there. I'm not sure if they're going to be a 4 seed, but I expect them to be in March. Next up, we got Indiana and Dayton. And honestly, Dayton, I think they're going to be good again, but they lost a little bit this offseason. And it's going to be tough, especially Deron Holmes losing that star player. It's going to be tough. And Indiana is actually one of those teams that I think people are really sleeping on this year. I really like Indiana. I think they brought in one of the most underrated transfers in the country, and I'm not talking about Umar Ballo. I am talking about the transfer from Washington State, a tall, lengthy defensive point guard that can drive the ball, Miles Rice. Miles Rice, I think, is maybe the most underrated transfer pickup this offseason. I think him, Omar Ballo, and they're returning Mackenzie Mbako, bringing in Luke Good to shoot the ball. They're going to need some shooting, but I think this Indiana team, they have a lot of length, a lot of defense. I really like them. I think they're going to be one of the better defensive teams in the country this year, and I like them over Dayton here to move on. Next up, we got Tennessee and Samford, and I'm not going to lie to you guys. I told you this is going to be my most chaotic region, and we're just getting started. I don't think Tennessee is going to be all that great this year. They'll probably be a pretty decent to good regular season team. They might get a 3 seed or a 4 seed, maybe even a 5, which I'm getting worse and worse, I know. But I don't think they're going to get better than a 3 seed, and I think they're in the range here to get upset. And I'm picking my biggest upset of this preseason. I'm taking Samford over Tennessee, and here's why. I don't think Tennessee is going to be that great this year. Losing Dalton Knecht. Yes, they are bringing back Zakai Ziegler, but I don't think that he's, going to be able to carry them in March Madness. In a matchup against Samford, even though they're losing a core transferring over to Kansas State, they are still a very well-coached and high-paced offense, and they got screwed last year in March Madness against Kansas. They almost pulled it off in the first round, and they are coming for revenge this year, and I think they're going to find somebody to replace the production of a core. They're still going to have one of the most fast-paced offenses in college basketball, especially in the mid-majors. Give me Samford over Tennessee. Biggest upset of the preseason. Mark it down, Samford's winning a game in March this year. Next up, we do have Florida versus Maryland, and That's a really good 7-10 matchup. I am, however, going to actually take the favorite for once in this region, and I am going to take the Florida Gators. I like Walter Clayton a lot. I think he's in for a big season, and I like the Gators here to beat the Terps. Next up, we got Gonzaga versus Weber State, and Battle of the State of Washington. I believe Weber State is in Washington. Gonzaga, too good here. I'm taking the Zags to move on. They're returning almost their entire roster this year. Graham Ike and Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman are the 3 stars of this team. I think that they are going to be able to have a pretty good season this year, and they're going to have a lot of hype heading into the tournament, as Joe Lunardi is predicting here with them being a 2 seed. Next up, we got Houston and Mississippi State, and let me tell you guys, I'm taking a risk here, but I don't think Houston's going to be a 1 seed this year. I think this year they're going to be a 2 or a 3, and which is still going to be really good. They're going to be a top 3-4 team in the Big 12. I just think that losing Jamal Shed is going to be a bigger loss than you guys think. And I know they're bringing in Milos Uzan, a transfer from Oklahoma. But is he going to be able to replace the production that Jamal Shed left? Not only playmaking with this team, but the defensive effort that he had. I think Houston could go far this year. I think Mississippi State is one of the biggest sleepers this year in the preseason. And I'm taking Mississippi State to move on. I think Josh Hubbard, one of the most underrated players in the country. Chris Jans, super good coach. He gets Mississippi State to the Sweet 16. Next up, we got Grand Canyon and Creighton, and I'm not gonna lie, guys. Pop Isaacs, I'm not a huge fan of. When he was at Texas Tech, I believe he was pretty inefficient. Like, I think that he was chucking the ball up a lot, and he is a good shooter, but he has to have the green light, and when you have the green light, you're gonna have a bad shooting game, eventually. And I think Grand Canyon is actually a pretty good defensive team, and Stephen Ashworth, he could be a good shooter as well. Ryan Cockburner down low, but I think Grand Canyon attacks that defender down low, and this backcourt, I think Ray Harrison is also, a lot of people talk about Tyon Grant Foster, but I think Ray Harrison is an elite player in college basketball, veteran point guard. I'm taking Grand Canyon to upset Creighton and move on to the Sweet 16 as a 12 seed. Next up, we got Indiana and Samford, and although I think that Samford is going to have one of the more high, fast-paced offenses in the country, like I said, I think Indiana has the length between Mackenzie Mbako, Umar Ballo, Miles Rice. These are tall, lengthy defenders. And if there's anyone that can slow down a fast-paced offense, it is going to be Indiana this year. And I'm taking the Hoosiers to move on to the Sweet 16 past Samford. Next up, we got Florida versus Gonzaga. And I think the Zags might have too much for Florida. I think Florida is an underrated team this year 100%. And I really want to go with them. They're a little bit of ties between these two teams, or at least these two coaches, as Florida's coach used to coach for San Francisco. And as we know, San Francisco is in the same league as Gonzaga, which is the West Coast Conference. And San Francisco, if I remember right, I think they did get a win over Gonzaga when he was coach, at least one. They had some really good years where San Francisco was actually in the tournament for a couple years straight there. And I think he's a phenomenal coach, and I think they have the pieces to be able to pull off an upset like this. But I think Zaga is just too complete. This is the year they get back to the Sweet 16. And I like them here a lot in this matchup. Next up, we do have Mississippi State and Grand Canyon. And 8 versus a 12 seed in the Sweet 16. Which one's going to go to the Elite 8? I told you this is going to be my chaotic region. And let me know if I delivered, because I think that this is a possible outcome based on all of these matchups. I'm having Grand Canyon move on to the Elite 8 as a 12 seed. I love this Grand Canyon team, guys. I think they're going to be one of the better mid-majors in the country this year. They have a veteran team. They're well-coached. They play good defense, and I think that's going to be a good matchup there. against Mississippi State to end their run at the Sweet 16. Grand Canyon moves on. Next up, we got Indiana versus Gonzaga, and I like both of these teams. I think both of these teams have Final Four potential this season between what they are returning. You got Graham Ike versus Umar Ballo down low, Miles Rice versus Ryan Nembhard at the point guard position. I think Gonzaga's X factor is going to be their wings. I think Gonzaga's X factor is going to be their wings, and more specifically Nolan Hickman. If he can finally take that jump this year and become a star, I think Gonzaga has potential to win the championship this year. Indiana's X factor is more so going to be their shooting, and I think they've done a good job at getting some shooters through the portal this year, and I think that they're going to be working on their shooting a lot through this offseason, and I trust Indiana here to get it done and pull off the win. 6 seed defeats a 2 in the Sweet 16 to go to the Elite 8. And we have our Elite 8 matchup between the Indiana Hoosiers and Grand Canyon Lopes. And again, I love the defense of this team. Their defense is going to get them to the Final Four and take down this wagon of a Cinderella in Grand Canyon, and Ray Harrison, and Tyon Grant Foster. And Indiana is back in the Final Four. The Hoosiers are having a year. They're probably going to make the college football playoff in football, and they're in the Final Four of my preseason bracketology predictions. And like I said, this is going to be my official preseason Final Four picks. So right now, Kansas and Indiana are preseason Final Four for me, officially. Let's see what we got in the other two regions. Let's head up top here to the top right region. We do have the Duke Blue Devils as our number 1 seed in this region. And let me tell you guys, Joe was on something here making this. I mean, yeah, I like the boldness, but come on. We know it's because of the name Duke that they are getting a 1 seed here. I think that they can be that good. But let's pump the brakes a little bit, Joe. Joe Lunardi's he must love him some Duke. But Cooper Flagg coming in, Colin Keipel looked really good in the charity games. Also, as a freshman, he looks like he's going to be one of the better shooters in the country this year. They still got Tyrese Proctor coming back as point guard to be a veteran. They're going to be a fantastic team, and they're going to get past either Howard or Wagner. I just don't know if they are going to be a number 1 seed and the number 2 overall seed in this tournament, like he is predicted. Next up, we got Michigan versus Kansas State, and this is a very good matchup. Doug McDaniel revenge game. They went and got Dusty May, the former coach of the FAU Owls. Very good pickup for this Michigan team. And they also brought with him Vlad Golden. It would have been really nice if he could have brought in John L. Davis. Instead, John L. Davis went to Arkansas. They also brought in the guy from Yale that was really good, the center. So they're going to have 2 centers between the guy from Yale and Vlad Golden. That is going to be very interesting to see how they are splitting minutes. But Kansas State has a really good team as well. Brought in some great transfers. Doug McDaniel, as mentioned, Okoro, as mentioned earlier, from Samford. And they have some great pieces on this team. And I think Kansas State's going to be solid. Jerome Tang is going to be cooking. This is going to be a fun matchup, but I am going to take Kansas State because Doug McDaniel revenge game. Got to give it to him. I think he's going to have an amazing year this year in the Big 12, as Jerome Tang loves his point guards, and he loves them to be scorers and stars. So give me Kansas State to move on. Next up, we got Cincinnati versus Princeton, and I love this Cincinnati team this year. They have an amazing backcourt. I think one of my favorite names in college basketball, Jizzle James. Phenomenal player. Came out of nowhere, but so far in these scrimmages and stuff, I've loved watching him play. And Day Thomas and Jizzle James might have the best named backcourt in the country this year. And that reason alone, I can't have them lose to a 12 seed in the first round, especially because I already have two 12 over 5s, and I'm very high on the Cincinnati team. I love that they are a top 5 seed, and I think that they are going to be amazing this year. And it is not just that backcourt. They are a very well-rounded team, and I'm very excited to watch them play this year. They are going to get back to March Madness this year and be a force in the Big 12. Next up, we got Texas A&M versus Vermont, and I actually like Texas A&M a lot this year. With Wade Taylor, Henry Coleman coming back from his injury, he's going to be a force down low, an underrated player down low, breakout year for him coming. I really do like the Aggies. They seem to disappoint in March Madness, or really at the beginning of the regular season, and then once everybody forgets about them again, they'll all of a sudden start being good after being highly ranked in the preseason. And when it comes to March Madness, they don't tend to make big runs. So this is going to have to be the year. I believe this has to be Wade Taylor's senior season. And Vermont, as a 13 seed, they're always going to be a threat to come out of their league. The Catamounts have gotten here multiple times, but they have never been able to get it done and pull off an upset. This could be the year. I mean, that wouldn't be a bad matchup for them against Texas A&M. But I am going to take the Aggies. I think Wade Taylor is going to be in for a really good year this season, and like I said, I'm a big fan of Henry Coleman. I think Buzz Williams gets this team out to the second round. Next up, we got Illinois versus Boise State, and I think Illinois has a lot of young players on this team that I think is going to be really good, and they're a sleeper for sure. But I am going to have Boise State. I think they have some experienced players on this team. I love Mountain West basketball, and we got to enjoy it these last couple of years while we can, guys. Mountain West basketball is not going to be with us, at least at this current formation of it, for very long, because Boise State and many other teams are moving on to the Pac-12 conference. And maybe the Pac-12, I'm hoping that they can add teams like New Mexico. That would be really fun, and the Pac-12 can turn into the new Mountain West and be even funner because they have teams like Gonzaga. But let's hope that they don't leave New Mexico and company out, because that will be a shame, because New Mexico is an amazing basketball school that we need in that conference. Next up, we do have Baylor versus Ohio, and Ohio is always a force to come out of the MAC, or a threat to come out of the MAC conference. Will they this year? Maybe. I'm not sure. But I think Baylor is going to be disgusting this year. Jeremy Roach, they brought in the portal. Norchad O'Meara, they brought in the portal. Both of those players have been to Final Fours with Duke and with Miami, respectively. And they have two 5-star guards coming in. VJ, I forget his last name, Evercombe? Might be butchering that, definitely am. But I know that he is very, very good, and bringing back guys like Langston Love, who is going to be veteran key players and pieces on this team. I like this Baylor team a lot, and I am picking the Baylor Bears here to move on past Ohio. Next up, we got Kentucky and Memphis. This is probably going to be one of the harder first-round games to pick here, between a 7 and a 10. Kentucky bringing in Mark Pope, bringing in Jackson Robinson. That's going to be, they have a lot of transfers, a new head coach. They can put it together and make a pretty good run in March Madness this year. I don't sleep on Kentucky, but Memphis has a key backcourt that they brought in between PJ Haggerty and Tyrese Hunter that I think is going to be a problem this year. And not just that, Memphis has a really solid team all around, and I'm going to take Memphis here to move on past Kentucky. That is definitely going to be an upset, because on paper, Kentucky definitely has the better roster all around. But I like Penny Hardaway. I like these guards. And whenever he has these type of guards, Memphis is tough to beat. Give me Memphis. Next up, we got UConn versus South Dakota State. And unfortunately for the Jackrabbits, they have to face the force of Dan Hurley, the back-to-back national champions. And although they are replacing 4 of their 5 starters, they're not losing this game in the first round. Give me UConn to move on to the next round. Next up, we have Duke versus Kansas State. And I think Kansas State could make some runs this year in March Madness, but I don't think that they are going to be defeating this Duke team. They do have the length to be able to defeat a team and compete with a team like Duke and try to shut down Cooper Flagg. But I think that this Duke team is too good. They're too good at shooting. I'm going to have Duke move on here. Next up, we got Cincinnati versus Texas A&M. And this would be, I think, one of the funner 4 or 5 matchups that we could get this year. I think that this has 4 or 5 matchup written all over it this season. I really like that they are in the same region, and I think this comes down to the wire. And I'm having Day Thomas, Jizzle James, buzzer beater. I'm predicting a buzzer beater in the round of 32 in the preseason. Yeah, kind of crazy, but we are taking Cincinnati to move on here to the Sweet 16. Book it. By a buzzer beater. Next up, we got Boise State versus Baylor. And I'm going to take Baylor. I really like Degenhart and this Boise State team. I think that they can get a win in March Madness this year, but Baylor is a force. Give me the Bears. Sick 'em. Next up, we got Memphis versus UConn. I would love to see a Memphis over UConn upset. I think that that would feed families. I think if UConn gets upset this year, it would be such a shock to everybody. It would just be an amazing March Madness moment. And I'm not preying on their downfall or anything like that. I think, them three-peating would be just as amazing. But UConn getting upset this year would be a huge moment. But I don't think Memphis is the team to do that. Although they have an outstanding backcourt, UConn is going to have some players this year that are going to step up into some big-time roles. They brought in a 5-star recruit in Liam McNeely. They brought in Aiden Mahaney from St. Mary's. They're bringing back Alex Caravan. They got Samson Johnson, who I think is going to take a huge step up this year. And they're just the best coached team in the nation, and I don't see Memphis being able to pull it off. Next up, we got Duke versus Cincinnati, and I am taking Duke here, and I do want to take Cincinnati in this matchup. I think that they could do it, and I think they are going to keep this game super, super close. It is going to be within 5-6 points, but I am going to have Duke knock off Cincinnati in the Sweet 16 and get back to the Elite 8 with Cooper Flagg and John Shire and this Duke team. Next up, we got Baylor versus UConn, and now we have a coach that could maybe knock off the back-to-back defending champions with Scott Drew here. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. I'm predicting Baylor to knock off UConn, the reigning 2-time champs. And Baylor, Scott Drew, has a well-coached team. And I think if Baylor gets their defense in order this year, they have national championship hopes. And I think that they can get there, and I'm going to have them defeat UConn here. I think that they are the more experienced team than UConn based on the rosters that they have this season, and I'm taking the Baylor Bears to knock off UConn in the Sweet 16. Next up, we got Duke versus Baylor, 1 seed versus our 3 seed. A little bit less chaotic than the last region, but I am going to take a slight upset here based on seeds, but I think they're the better team. Give me Baylor to defeat Duke. I think Baylor's the better team than Duke. I know Baylor's the 3 seed, Duke's the 1 seed in this bracketology, but I think Baylor has the better roster. I think Baylor has the better coach, and I think Baylor is going to win this game, and they are going to make the Final Four. So we have 3 of my 4 preseason Final Four picks. We got Kansas, we got Baylor, 2 teams out of the Big 12, and we got a team out of the Big 10 down there in Indiana. And now we have our last region, and Alabama is our number 1 seed, and they are going to go against Arkansas Little Rock. I would love to see Arkansas Little Rock back into the tournament. They had that one fantastic team when they were coached by Chris Beard that made a nice little run, and that was one of the funnest runs I remember from March Madness within the past so many years. I would love to see them back in the tournament, but they are not going to beat Bama. I'm not picking a 16-over-1. Like I mentioned earlier, that Samford over Tennessee 14-over-3 upset was going to be my biggest first-round upset that I'm predicting in the preseason, and I think if that was the matchup to happen, I think it would. Next up, we got Wake Forest versus Ohio State, and this is an amazing 8-9 matchup. I was giving Joe some slack for that Duke 1 seed pick, but he was cooking with this 8-9 matchup. This would be fantastic. And I'm not sure who I want to go with here. I think both of these teams have fantastic players, but and I would love to see both of them make the March Madness tournament, especially Wake Forest. I feel like they are on the bubble, just on the outside looking in every single year. But I'm going to go with Ohio State. I really like the roster that they put together this year. I like the run that they had at the end of last season after they fired Chris Holtmann, and I'm taking the Buckeyes to move on here. St. John's versus Bradley, and St. John's, Rick Pitino coach team, getting back to the tournament, first time as the coach of St. John's, was just on the outside looking in last year. He's been to the tournament recently coaching Iona, and of course we know he's won national champions with both Louisville and Kentucky. Now he's the coach of St. John's, and man, does he have an insane roster this year. I'm taking St. John's over Bradley, although I do like this Bradley team. This Bradley team, I think, is going to win the Missouri Valley Conference this year, with Drake losing Darian DeVries and Tucker DeVries to West Virginia, and a lot of their other players transferring all over the place to different schools. I think Drake is going to be out of the mix for the most part. And then you got Indiana State. They lost Robbie Buckets. They lost their coach to St. Louis. They might be out of the picture. Bradley was a force last year, still competing with these top-level teams. Drake was in the tournament last year. Indiana State should have been in the tournament last year. They got robbed. I think Bradley could get there this year. I think that's a tough matchup against St. John's, though. Texas Tech versus Louisiana Tech. Battle of the Techs. Louisiana Tech out of Conference USA, they could do it, but I think this Texas Tech team too good. They brought in JT Toppin, the transfer from New Mexico. I think he is going to have a big year in the Big 12 this year. And, Texas Tech, they're gritty, they're defensive. They're going to be tough to beat for any mid-major, and I'm going to take Texas Tech here. Next up, we got Arkansas versus either Rutgers or Miami. And in this matchup, I think I'm going to take Rutgers over Miami, actually. Miami lost a lot of pieces to the portal this year. It's going to be tough for them to build that back up. And I love these freshmen, Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey on Rutgers. I think they win that, but I am going to take Arkansas to defeat Rutgers. Arkansas's got some amazing freshmen, too. I mean, I know DJ Wagner's not technically a freshman, but basically, and Boogie Fland as well. This Arkansas team is stacked, along with John L. Davis. Not to mention, there's so many players to mention here, and Arkansas is going to be a tough out this year with John Calipari. I know John Calipari hasn't had the best recent history when it comes to March Madness, especially last year losing to Oakland, and not too long ago losing to St. Peter's in the first round, where he's also had some stacked teams. Not saying it's impossible for Rutgers to beat them, but I think Arkansas does get the job done there. Next up, we got North Carolina versus Towson. I really like Towson, but I got to go North Carolina here. RJ Davis, senior season. He's going to be playing outstanding. I got to take the Tar Heels here to move on. Next up, and not to Ian Jackson. He's looking good as a freshman so far for North Carolina. They might have found something there for sure. Michigan State versus Ole Miss. Tom Izzo versus Chris Beard. Awesome coaching matchup here. And I'm taking Izzo over Chris Beard all day. I'm sorry. I could break down these rosters, but it's a ton of transfers for Ole Miss put together that Chris Beard's trying to build here at Ole Miss. And give me Izzo ball. Izzo in March Madness against Ole Miss. Give me Izzo. Next up, we got Iowa State versus Purdue Fort Wayne. And I'm taking Iowa State. Iowa State, man, returning almost everybody. Taman Lipsey, Keshawn Gilbert, one of the better backcourts in the country. Just all around great team. Brought in somebody to play center from Charlotte, who's a pretty good rebounder. I think this Iowa State team is going to be, they're built to make a pretty deep run this year. I'm taking them to move on past Purdue Fort Wayne. Next up, we got Bama versus Ohio State. No, this is not football. These football schools are battling for a shot at the Sweet 16, and I am going to take Bama. I do really like Ohio State, but I think this Bama team is just stacked to bottom, from top to bottom, between Mark Sears, between Grant Nelson, between bringing in guys like Aiden Holloway and Cliff Amourier through the portal. they're going to be a very tough out this year in March Madness. And after the Final Four run last year, where their offense was really cooking in March Madness, I have a hard time believing that it's not going to be once again this season. Next up, St. John's versus Texas Tech. And I really want to go with Texas Tech here. I think that they have a really good defensive team. I love this St. John's team. I'm fairly high on them in the preseason, as I had them as my third-ranked team in the Big East. And I'm going to take St. John's to win this game. And it is not just because of Kadary Richmond, but they have a really good backcourt between Kadary Richmond and Devion Smith, and down low, Zuby Ejiofor, the former backup center recruit for Kansas. He has been playing fantastic in these scrimmages in the preseason, and I know it's the preseason, but there's a lot of hype right now between these St. John's players, and I really do like this roster. I think I'm picking them to beat Texas Tech and get to the Sweet 16 here for a matchup against Alabama, which I think would be excellent. Next up, we do have Arkansas versus North Carolina. This is another matchup that I would love to see. North Carolina, like I mentioned, I think Ian Jackson, an amazing player already as a freshman. I cannot wait to watch him play. I think he's going to be one of the biggest impact freshmen in the country this year. Arkansas, they have a ton of impact freshmen as well and a ton of impact players. I think Arkansas is too deep here, but do we trust John Calipari anymore in March Madness? Like, that's why he gets players to the NBA. But can we trust him in March Madness? I think that they get to the Sweet 16 this year, and I'm going to take Arkansas here to move on. Next up, we do have Michigan State versus Iowa State, and it's hard to go up against Izzo in March, but I like this Iowa State team. I think they're built for March this year. They got some experience getting into the Sweet 16 last year, and I think that they get back there again this year. They're very well coached. They have an amazing team, and they get back there. They're going to knock out Izzo here in the second round. Next up, we got Alabama versus St. John's, and I really want to pull the trigger on the St. John's upset right here, guys. Like, you guys have no idea. I really want to do it, but I don't know if I can pull it off in the preseason and pull the trigger on St. John's. Maybe once we get a little deeper into the season. I'm going to be doing updated versions of this video, which I'm sure if you guys have made it this far into the video, you guys are going to be wanting to see updated versions of these about every 2 weeks. And then when we get further into the season, closer to March Madness, we will be doing these weekly. And then a ton of brackets when the official bracket comes out. A ton of college basketball content coming, guys. Definitely subscribe. But maybe when we get further into the season, as we do updated versions of these, I will decide to change my mind and have St. John's go further. I think Bama is a beatable team if they are having an off night with their offense, and if you can slow Mark Sears down, I think that this Bama team is going to be beatable. But I am good. I think Bama is amazing this year, and they have a fantastic roster. I have to take Alabama in this one, and I am going to take Iowa State over Arkansas. I think Iowa State very good defensively. I cannot trust Calipari to go any further until proven otherwise than the Sweet 16 right now. And Iowa State has a good defensive team. They're going to have a good game plan for Arkansas, and I think they have a fantastic veteran backcourt and some good shooters as well. So give me Iowa State there to move on. And we got our 1 versus 2, the only region where we have our 1 and 2 seed coming out and to the Elite Eight. And I am going to take the 1 seed. I am taking Bama to get back to the Final Four for the second year in a row. I just think they have guys on this team between Mark Sears and Grant Nelson. I wish they could have returned Rylan Griffin, but he's going to be on the team that they are facing next. But I do really like this Bama team, and I think that they get back to the Final Four so far in the preseason. Where we're at right now, I have a hard time going against them. I think St. John's and Iowa State could definitely both give them a run for their money and possibly pull it off. I just can't pull the trigger just yet, maybe here in the near future when we do updated versions of these. But now we have this is my official preseason Final Four, guys. We got Kansas, Alabama, kind of my chalky preseason picks here, but those rosters are hard to deny right now. And then we got Baylor as a 3 seed, which I love this Baylor team. I think that they get back to the Final Four this year. And my sleeper as a 6 seed, we have Indiana. I think Indiana maybe my favorite team in the Big Ten this year. I think that they are going to have a fantastic defense, and if they can, shoot the ball pretty well, halfway decent, I like them in the Final Four. So we have the Hoosiers returning. So this is my preseason Final Four, guys. Let me know what you guys think. And again, let me know down below in the comment section who your preseason Final Four is. Let's get into these matchups. Kansas, Alabama, Mark Sears, DeJuan Harris Jr. You got Rylan Griffin versus former team last year, who was in the Final Four with last year. You got Cliff Amorie versus Hunter Dickinson, which is an interesting point there because those two centers are actually very familiar with each other in the Big Ten, which neither of them are in anymore, as Hunter Dickinson is on Kansas in the Big 12, and Cliff Amorie is in the SEC with Alabama, but formerly with Rutgers and Michigan, when they would clash in the Big Ten, Cliff Amorie and Hunter Dickinson was always a sight to see. Now they're in the Final Four against each other. Fantastic storyline there. Grant Nelson, KJ Adams Jr. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Aiden Holloway, AJ Storr. I mean, stars everywhere in this matchup. But I'm actually going to go with someone that you guys might not think I'm going to pick, but I am going to take Alabama to defeat Kansas here. And I think Kansas would probably be favored heading into this matchup. But Nate Oates has been doing a very good job getting this Bama team to go further and further and making it all the way to the Final Four last year. I think he takes the next step up with this amazing roster and gets back to the Final Four, and this time is playing for a national championship. Next up, we got Baylor versus Indiana, and this is going to be great. I think Indiana is going to be a fantastic defensive team, as I've been saying, but I think Baylor, if they can get their defense straight, they can be one of the best teams in the country. And I think that these impact freshmen for Baylor are going to play such a big role this year on this team, and with Jeremy Roach coming in and Scott Drew already coaching his freshman guards year in and year out to be great, it is going to be tough. And Norchad Omier, we saw in that Final Four run that he had with Miami, he can be a rebounding machine, and I think Norchad Omier is going to be a force in this game. He's going to outplay Umar Ballo, and I love these guards for Baylor. It is going to be enough to get past Indiana, and Baylor makes it to the national championship game. Nate Oates, Scott Drew, Alabama, Baylor for the national title. So let's get into it. Both these teams, in my opinion, can win the championship this year, but I'm going to go out and straight up say it. My preseason national champion pick is the Baylor Bears, and it is a slight sleeper. It is not one of the favorites. I guess they're probably a top 10 favorite to win it all this year, but I love this roster, and them preseason being a 3 seed, I think people are sleeping on them. They might get the 3 seed just because they play in a very hard conference in the Big 12, but that is going to only prepare these guys, especially their freshmen, for the moment in March Madness, and I think this is the best Baylor team that Scott Drew has had since he won the championship back in 2021, and I think he gets a second championship here, and he defeats Alabama there to get it. So that is it for my preseason bracketology predictions, guys. Let me know what you guys think about my picks. These are my official Final Four picks, and Baylor is my official preseason national champion pick. So let me know what you guys think, guys. College basketball is right around the corner. It starts this Monday, and we get a big matchup between Gonzaga and Baylor on the first day of college basketball. Not a ton of super big matchups in this first week, but we got a couple here and there, and I'm super excited for it. We're going to have updated versions of this video coming out every once in a while. I know you guys love this series, and I love making this series, but we're going to have a ton more college basketball content as well. So make sure you guys subscribe, and yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching.